Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Um, Thank you and welcome to the Blackboard and Times Higher Education Japan Roundtable. So today we're going to talk about transforming higher education in Japan through digital learning. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Joyce Lau, and I am your moderator today, and I work with Times Higher Education. And we are also really happy to be joined today by our panelist, Dr. Caroline Steele, who is a senior strategic consultant with Blackboard. I also want to give special thanks to all of the Japanese university leadership who have taken time out of their day to join us. So thank you. I'm just going to give a little introduction that you already know. After nearly 2 years, um, finally restrictions are easing in Japan, and now we have 2 years of experience with online education. The response from students suggests that there may be some changes that have been welcome, although, of course, there are also challenges. Um, a hybrid model delivery combining both face to face education and online education may be the key to transforming higher education in Japan. And we can also talk a little bit about how these digital processes can promote internationalization and innovation. Internationalization is really interesting because, of course, now your foreign students are finally being able to come back into your country. This discussion will take a very loose and open debate format. We have about 6 or 7 questions. If you are interested in speaking, you can just click the little raise hand guy here on the bottom of your screen, or you can just turn on your video and just wave to me because we're a small group today. So at any point, jump in. You can also use the chat that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I know that you've all found it now. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in with our first question, which is what elements of digital education have been the most successful? I don't know if anyone from a Japanese university wants to pipe in and talk about what some of their successes have been. Or if Caroline, would you like to jump in and talk about some of the successes so far of digital education?
Sure, thank you, Joyce. I'm happy to kick things off. And I recently did a paper on looking at students' experience of the pandemic. And I guess what I was really interested in there is focusing on the learner's perspective, so how learners felt about that experience. And I think that the most successful elements of digital education were those that really thought about it from the learner's perspective. So I think about that a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sort of going from survival up to self-actualization. So, for example, those universities that thought about their digital ecosystem, whether students had access to the tools and the connectivity that they needed, so reliable devices and internet, I think were really at that sort of fundamental level. And then in terms of sort of safety, like students feeling safe about learning online and feeling they had the digital capabilities and were supported by the institution in that online learning. Um, the next thing that came through quite strongly in the research that I did looking at papers across the globe was that sense of belonging. Was something that was a lot more difficult to do online. So that teacher presence and learner presence and designing formal and informal opportunities for students to really connect with each other, to connect with their teachers, to connect with the institution. So I think that was a really key point. And then in terms of the sort of the design of the course and students, own learning, it was really around providing super clear guidelines on how to approach tasks, what standards of performance were expected, what they need to do to get ready for exams, and also, constructive feedback and on, tips on how to improve their performance, particularly online, because a lot of students hadn't learnt online before either. Um, and of course, a key part of this was also thinking beyond the students about staff and faculty members in particular, and how they were supported, and enabled through relevant professional development, support, communities of practice, that kind of thing. So I'm not sure what resonates there in Japan exactly. I couldn't find a lot of studies there, so I'd be very interested to hear from some of the other panel members on any of those points or other points that you might like to make about what was successful.
Thank you very much, Caroline, talking about belonging and security and clarity. Professor Yoshikawa, would you like to add something to this discussion about the successes of digital education?
Yes, in a way, Japan has also, at this moment, just we talking about the successful part and other questions. I have also that I can explain a lot of the negative part a lot. However, this time, like since Japan has also some of the classes a big class, and those kind of class, uh, we could provide it also the class in a kind of so-called on demand. How to call the maybe I think uh, English way to say uh, like a on demand, meaning that we set up also the like pictures and whatever, so student can look at that class anytime and they can answer. Of course, a faculty member have to responsible to answer for it, and those things are very convenient. And also, Japanese university, many of them does not have a dormitory near the class. So like many students have to come to class like, even like 2 hours in the train in the morning, and those one online class we could a student that doesn't have to like a really crowded train to coming to class, and that's it's an advantage. And also even some of the class like even the like maybe about 20 students class, and they can talk face to face, much more easy to talk to the faculty members, professors, and those things has a total of them. We have a lot of the advantage. However, the okay, I don't want to go to the detail for the disadvantage at this moment, but the foreign student, person who couldn't come to the Japan, also like a on-demand class, which I mentioned it, and those classes fine, they could take any time in their countries. However, the like live a kind of face-to-face, like now, and like this class, we have a Japanese hours. We cannot change. Some of them live in England, some of them live in United States, and those students they have to early or late night, and they have to take a class. And it is very that sense is world time. Even the technology advance, we cannot change it. So that's at this moment. Just I'll talk about that, and later also, I want to talk about much more technology and also disadvantage of the online class.
Professor Yoshikawa, I'm so glad that you addressed the issue of foreign students because, so many students all over the world were stuck in different time zones. I know that Australia has started to let students back in, Japan has started to let students back in. This is quite a new development. China still has not let students back in. So the on demand classes sound very interesting because one thing I've heard from students is that they're really stuck. They have to wake up at 3 in the morning to attend a lecture. Um, but I mean, I'm very happy to also talk about the challenges faced by students. I mean, and some of the downsides um, of online learning. Professor Yoshikawa, do you want to talk a little bit about the other side, maybe some of the negatives or the technological issues?
Okay. First of all, psychological issue is one thing, but before that, I want to go to the like most worst thing what we couldn't do, like in-person interactions. I don't know how to explain to like we have like a special Japanese word, hadakankaku, which meaning is like we recognize atmosphere, how to communicate with student, and especially undergraduate student in online class, in order to giving a knowledge, I think we have not really troublesome. However, in order to developing a communication skills, it's not communication skill, it's a language, more than that. So like those kind of no matter how hard we try to fully transfer how to communicate, how to give to the knowledge, but in Japan also the kind of the very uh, like a very special kind of the we have a so-called seminar class. Seminar class is maybe 10 student, 15 student, or like some of the 5 student. We like we will take care. We will be an advisor, like at least like a third year, fourth year, sophomore and senior student. And those students, we try to helping to educate not only the knowledge, at the same time, uh, more than that, how to communicate with different cultural student, whatever. So no, those small class, normally foreign student is also there. And communicate, making a friend. And as you know, whatever we will maybe teach, uh, intercultural communication in the class, and honestly to say, those students come together, different cultural students come together and become a friends, they understand much better. So those kind of like in-person connections, communication skills, I really, honestly say, we failed it. We couldn't teach them how to do it. That's my biggest actually concern for uh, online kind of the classes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the socialization is really important because, of course, a university campus has clubs, it has you eat together, you do sports together, you hang out after class, and you also do laboratory work. You can do practical or clinical work. So you're right, there are many things that online education can't entirely replicate. I was wondering if any of the other Japanese university administrators wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons of digital education. What are some of the good things and some of the bad things that you've seen over the last 2 years? I don't, or maybe Caroline, do you want to talk about some of the downsides of online education or challenges?
Sure. Well, I think the that communication piece is just so important, and I totally take Professor Yoshikawa's point about, then you have the layer of the cultural context for communicating, and you don't have those paralinguistic skills or the ability to see people's paralinguistic cues, so their body language or their actual physical presence, which makes it a lot more challenging to communicate. Um, and alongside of that, it's more difficult for students to have some of those incidental conversations that they have, for example, after a lecture, where perhaps there's something that some people didn't understand, and they can check in with a friend and say, I'm not sure that I really understood that point, and they can have a little discussion about it and clear that up. So it's very difficult for the faculty members to know if students are keeping up with the concepts that they're relating. And it's quite difficult sometimes for the students, without feeling they're interrupting, to ask questions. And I guess that's where I think we have to think more about how we design for online learning, because it's very difficult to translate it from face to face. It's much easier the other way around, from online to face, but designing for online learning means, for example, using things like polls and quizzes and, even, different ways of finding, for example, points that need clarifying or where students aren't quite sure what you meant. So you can capture those as part of your interaction with students. And often things like polls and quizzes feel a little bit more anonymous. So they can be a great way to kind of capture that and know which points to teach to. But I'll see whatever anyone else has to say about that.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Professor Takahashi or Professor Shigeyuki, if you have anything to add about the pros and cons of digital education, because we can move on to talk about looking ahead. How do we reintroduce face-to-face learning, especially with students coming back, while also integrating digital education? Because in a way, the shift to digital already happened. Everyone's already online. Everyone's already set up on whatever system they're using. And at least in my experience, everyone's already chatting. At the University of Hong Kong, we all have our own WhatsApp groups. Everyone's already digital. So how do we take the next step of going back to school physically while also keeping up with these digital tools? Caroline, would you like to talk a little bit about reintroducing in-person education?
Sure. And again, I think we need to think about this really carefully, because at the moment the world is in such a chaotic state. I think we need to be ready to pivot either way. We need to be able to say, okay, we're going to go to hybrid, but sometimes we may need to go back to online, and other times we can go to face-to-face. It is, the last couple of years have taught us we've got to be incredibly flexible. So again, we need to think about how we design for that. And there's a few different models around. In the United States, one model that is very popular is one called high flex learning. And high flex learning has a couple of different kinds of ways of doing it, but one of them is, for example, thinking about how you can be teaching online as well as face-to-face. So you can be doing it synchronously, so you could have people in the classroom and people online interacting. If we're going to do that, we have to think about how we set up the classroom and how we design it so that those people who are in a remote mode I still feel like they're included in the class. So again, we need to think about that communication style and how we make sure that everyone feels included in that learning experience. And again, that comes down to perhaps looking at some models that have worked successfully elsewhere, ensuring that faculty have exposure to those models to consider how they might adapt it for their own style of teaching, and also giving students some really good guidelines on what's expected in terms of communication, perhaps even some leadership in that space. So sometimes, and I know it may not be appropriate in Japan, but in some countries, we actually expect a lot of our students in terms of them leading sessions with other students as well. So that's something to think about in terms of that sort of high flex modality. I'll stop there and see if anyone would like to talk more about hybrid or high flex or anything
Yeah,
else.
I think that it's really challenging because actually right now I'm on the side also taking classes at the University of Hong Kong. And so, you have the professor who's trying to speak into Zoom, but he also has students in the classroom. And there is a design issue because sometimes the professor would just walk off screen because he's dealing with a student in the classroom. Or maybe there's a student who's typing in a question, but he doesn't see it. So the design of how to do both, this kind of high flex um, system is really interesting. I was wondering if some of the professors or the administrators and leaders in Japan could talk a little bit about how they've been balancing having some students in Japan, some students not in Japan, the back and forth between going back to school and doing things online. Does anyone have any experiences that they could share? Um, Professor Yoshikawa, can you tell us a little bit about how it's worked at Tokai University?
Sorry, just keep talking.
That's
Um,
okay. We appreciate
but
it.
so what really we try to accommodate, especially this time different zone was, okay, I mentioned as a on demand, that's a asynchronous online course. We try to provide it also the foreign student as much as possible. But also, if coming to the small class, synchronous class, and of course, like we can talk like this, each other's, and this one we couldn't avoid to like on time. So and also the coming to the also the I'm a political science international studies political science faculty, so I didn't have a not so much problem, but coming to the some of the how to say, uh, engineering department faculty members, they have to set up cameras and try to showing to experiment or whatever, and try to making a class on demand and showing on demand. On demand means uh, recorded actually class, but at the same time, he's there and he tried to uh, answer and the questions immediately. He can do that. So much more makes a student looking at that kind of the experiment and uh, immediately he or she can ask for the ask questions of uh, uh, faculty. And we try to many, each faculty made a lot of the, I think, effort to creating own class, how to teach. So, and also many also the, unfortunately, my social science majors, I cannot really advance the technologies, but they have also, they made a lot of the gadget to even the small studio in your their own like a office, and they accommodated like that. So, however, still, honestly to say again, it is difficult. And you mentioned also the mentally uh, influence and even anybody. And we started actually next last fall semester small class, we try to do uh, face to in face-to-face actual class in using a big classroom and spread out, putting a fan to a kind of open the air, and we started doing this. And of course, after the class, students have to go back to the immediately go back basically, but just like between that, the student was very happy to talking each other, and like unfortunately, honestly to say, and mentally, and the kind of the, it was a kind of depressed student. Not only my university, I heard from the all over the world, including Japan, of course, meaning is, and if you staying at home and only doing like a online class, many students are unfortunately depressed. This was, we made a lot of effort to try not, and we set up also a lot of the counseling, like a kind of telephone lines, more than usual. And however, still, and the students talking each other and complain each other their today's problem, and that kind of time they needed. And uh, we try to, in order to accommodate really like a big class and a small number, like a 100 students class, we only the maybe classroom, we put on a 20 student and spread out. And we made such kind of effort a lot. And still, we cannot, everybody believes that it is also the, some of the class, it's good, but it's not replaceable, like I feel it. And if you are the student, what do you feel also?
Yeah, I think nothing really replaces being in person.
Mm.
I would just like to ask Professor Shiguki Atarashi, do you have any experiences at Doshisha University about maybe some of the good or bad points of online learning? Or maybe Professor Takahashi at Toyu University. Do you want to talk a little about maybe some of the good or negative points? Hello, I can see you.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to this round table. So I'm sorry that late for the time to join this meeting, and I am talking about my experience at the Toyo University in Tokyo. Basically, I recognize that the university education is fundamentally required to be taught face to face, right? But the university intends to teach class on campus, and our university is not a distance higher education institute. But because of the Corona disaster, we have faced to the statement of the disaster, and just 2 years ago, we are preparing for the new school year, but we had to start the non-face-to-face classes. And unfortunately, our university designed and gained a portal site for supporting education. So that's why we use this supporting portal site for each classroom. And most of professors, faculty members uses this portal site to teach their subject and HyFlex. And some of professors uses on demand. So I personally, I prefer to the face-to-face. So that's why I chose the on-demand, not high-flex class method. But basically, just 2 years ago, we had a very serious problem to deliver the subject to students. Because in those days, I mean the key point was to develop receive environment would support the students' online participation. some students use PC and a tablet, but some students use a mobile phone. And also the students at the home, uh, not necessary to prepare the Wi-Fi environment. So that's why our university supports students. We provide a flat subsidized for students, just 50,000 yen. After that, the students adjust their received the environment was better than before. Okay, after that, from the experience these 2 years, so we use HyFlex and or on demand. So and also that we decided to from this April, we just start again face-to-face class. But we face to the corona disaster again, so we will use HyFlex again and face-to-face. But small class, I mean the seminar and some experiment class should be face-to-face. Yes, that's all.
Thank you so much, Professor Takahashi. And I think you make a really great point that in a home environment, some people are on a mobile, some people are on a laptop, a tablet, a desktop. Some people live in, especially in Hong Kong, and I'm sure also in Japanese cities, very small homes, noisy homes. And it's so heartening to hear administrators being so sympathetic that students have different environments. And earlier Caroline talked a little bit about how technology really affects this. It brings us to our next question, which is what types of technology, whether currently used or maybe future technology, emerging technology, can be used to enhance the curriculum, to enhance how we teach. Caroline, would you like to pick that up? You had mentioned briefly before using different tools like pop quizzes or, and I think Professor Yoshikawa talked about even people using little devices. What are some of the technologies that we can use to enhance curricula?
Sure. I think that, sorry, I have to change my headset. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I think that those sort of interactive technologies that can just break up the learning a little bit can be really helpful. I'm sure we've heard a lot about people getting really exhausted by being online all the time. And it is really interesting because it's even that sense of personal space. People aren't used to standing this close together, in the real world. And sort of having that kind of thing and being online all the time can be really exhausting. So breaking things up, yes, webinar fatigue, Rahayu. Breaking things up with little pop quizzes, little interactive brainstorming exercises, also some gamification can be really great, to get people a little bit more motivated and competitive. There's lots of sort of small technologies like that, but then there's also things that are more significant investments, obviously, and particularly in terms of some of the existing and emerging technologies. I think we need to think carefully about how they fit with what the learning is and what the discipline is. Because I think they need to have a very symbiotic relationship in that they benefit from one another. So, for example, in something like medical education or in engineering, which Professor Yoshikawa mentioned earlier, there is certainly a case for things like simulations. Rather than having to do the experiments and try and film them, finding simulations that actually show what is happening on the screens, and potentially that can have quizzes embedded in it, or opportunities to stop and talk about what's happening or take notes. um, Augmented mixed reality. Again, these are quite expensive technologies, but in certain disciplines like engineering and medical sciences, they can actually be less expensive than even the practical, learning that students do, and can mitigate some risks that go with going on site or dealing with real human subjects. So I think some of those technologies can really enhance the curriculum, but we need to think about them carefully. Just going with the trend doesn't necessarily mean you're making a great investment. I mean, sure, we've got things like AI these days, and sometimes chatbots can be really fantastic for students as to guide them, to give them some ideas about what's coming up next, what they need to do. And I've seen some wonderful examples of chatbots and sort of personal tutors in some universities that have taken a bit of the load off faculty, as well as made it a bit more interesting for students. But they all have their limitations as well. So when we think about AI for marking, for example, we have to think about whether there's any bias within the AI. And students sometimes, and their parents who are investing in education, want to see the human being involved and don't want to necessarily just be marked by a machine. So I think they're also considerations. However, I do know in Japan you have robot cafes, and robotics have been a big thing for a long time. So it may be different culturally in Japan in terms of how students, feel about interacting with AI and chatbots and so forth. Any thoughts?
Caroline, thank you very much. And I think that brings up, so far we've talked almost entirely about the student experience, but we should also talk about the faculty or staff experience. And another question is, how can administrations support their faculty and staff, who of course are not all experts in digital technology or in online learning? If you are a professor who is used to standing in front of a lecture hall and suddenly you have a microphone and you're asked to do quizzes, um, how can we support the employees of the university in making this shift to digital? Do any of the professors have any experiences they want to share? Professor Ishikawa.
Sorry again. And even though we are using a robot long time, but it not necessarily, most probably regarding about like this communication, it was the same. So last year, when COVID-19 was started, constantly we did for the faculty members, for the like a school, a kind of the how to use the technology, whatever the how to do the uh, uh, control, and those teaching management system also we introduce it, and but many of them they don't know so how to use it, and this one also we have to teach the student also. So, and also each department, each schools, we have a different kind of the engineering department, international relations, political science, economics, and mathematics, and it's a very different. So each department using based of the school provided technology in generally, I think young professors, they are very good at technologies, new technologies, and many of them, they started also, we are teaching each others. And if you find out a better one, also, no, this is maybe better to use it. It was a very, honestly to say, challenging situations. However, in a way, somehow it was a kind of emergency. We put it together, and also uh, that sense, uh, we are very successful helping each other. And also however, as a, like a freshman student, that does we have a very big problem because they don't know uh, uh, maybe university's class system, and the top of that, a kind of a new uh, teaching management system and uh, how to connect to that, how to submit even the assignment. And so it was that kind of small things, but it was very difficult for the student. And we constantly making a kind of those on demand, a kind of the teaching how to please look at the student telling you to how to look at using this system, but still it was difficult. So we have to depend on that each faculty members and also the many staff also got online. We try to help a student. And of course, this year we didn't have not so much trouble, but like last year's April, it last meaning that 2 years ago, the April, it was very, we start from April, it was very difficult. So, but, and also university also provided to, unfortunately, Japanese, I think the young people was depend on smartphone too much. That's the reason many, some of the house, they don't have a Wi-Fi system. So university try to helping to the financially and set up also the like a Wi-Fi system for the student house home. But somehow we could do like this, and same as I think everybody, I think it's just struggling like that. But we we could kind of helping each other, also teaching each other, and each department develop their own way.
Thank you so much. And I think you're right. I mean, I think it's regional. I think in Hong Kong also, we mostly use cell data and cell phones. And of course, while you can do a lot of things, you can't really take a full university course on a screen that's this small. And this leads us to our concluding question, which I think is a really important one. How can hybrid education um, fuel innovation and internationalization? And I really want to talk about the innovation because, as several people here have said, people are sort of helping each other in informal ways. Maybe a younger professor can help a more senior professor with the technology. People are finding workarounds. Um, so in a way, this fuels a kind of innovation. Caroline, do you want to talk a little bit about how hybrid education can boost innovation?
Sure. Well, I think linking back to your previous point, dealing with how we support faculty is just so important in all of that. We have strong beliefs as teachers about, how we teach, and we really need to use evidence to show that there are alternative ways of teaching that work just as well, if not better. So areas like learning analytics are really important because we can actually gather data as we experiment with innovation, and we can share the insights and the findings in the way that we start to innovate. So we might come up with a great idea. We can use learning analytics to find out, if we think it's working well, is it really working as we intended? Maybe there's even some great points that we don't understand that are happening in amongst that we can unpack a little bit with learning analytics and also with qualitative data. So I think that's really important because evidence can change people's minds if they see that this works just as well as that, and so forth. I think innovation is something that, when I think about Japan, I think of Japan as a incredibly innovative nation. I mean, I actually studied Japanese and Japanese history and economics a long time ago, and I remember after the Meiji Restoration, Japan industrialized in less than 30 years. So my bets are with Japan to really fuel innovation and internationalization. It's a matter of finding how hybrid education really fits with the culture, that really fits with the teachers, the students, and the institutions, and also looking at what's happening around the world, and then adapting that, and starting to lead the way, because I think it's entirely possible. Would anyone else like to respond?
Well, yeah, and you talked about gamification earlier, and of course, Japan is the world leader in development of video
Yes.
games, which and we can laugh at it, but actually that's the way a lot of students interact, is via video games. Um, is there anything that anyone else would like to add about hybrid or digital education in Japan, or anywhere? Any lessons that we can learn moving forward? Caroline, do you have any concluding remarks from Blackboard, or anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, I guess in conclusion, from my perspective, I think that, we need to think about the quality of education, and there's a lot out there that we can draw on in terms of, what are the hallmarks and the standards of quality. But when we get to innovation, it is about doing things differently, and it's about solving problems and challenges in different kinds of ways, and ways that are tied to the context where they occur. And I really feel that, where the pandemic has made us very isolated. Prior to that, we were incredibly globally connected world. But internationally, people are really keen to re-establish those connections. And I think people like myself are very keen to get to Japan again. And Japan and Japanese culture, I think, continues to fascinate people all over the world. And people want to experience that. They want to live there. They want to learn there. They want to connect in with Japan. So I see a huge opportunity, both virtually and physically, through that sort of hybrid mode, for Japan to show us a different way of thinking about what hybrid education can be, and the role that technologies can play in that.
Thank you so much. I also miss Japan. My first vacation, when Hong Kong lets me out, is going to be in Japan. Thank you so much to the professors who are here, and to Caroline for this really interesting discussion. And I really hope that, I know that your borders are opening and that you're going back to school, which I wish we could also do. And thank you so much, Professor Yoshikawa and Professor Takahashi, for your contributions. I hope that we can continue this conversation another time, and I wish you good luck and good health as you move on to your new school year.